I had not meant to sleep in my old room that night. Truth was, I had not meant to come back to the farm at all. The Cole place sat 5 miles north of the Missouri Road, tucked behind black walnut trees and a creek that flooded every hard rain. By the time I rode in, the sky had gone the color of old iron, and freezing rain clicked against my coat like thrown gravel. The fields lay dark and empty on both sides of the lane. Corn stubble poked through the mud. The barn leaned a little worse than I remembered. The house waited beyond it with no lamp in the windows. That was how I had left it. Cold, quiet, unforgiving. I tied my horse in the shed and stood there a moment with rain running off the brim of my hat, listening to the place breathe. Every board seemed to remember me. Every hinge, every loose shutter, every sag in the porch roof. I had been gone 3 years, long enough for dust to settle over grief, but not long enough for it to stop knowing my name. Inside, the house smelled of damp ash, mouse nests, and old pine. I shut the door with my shoulder and set my rifle against the wall. The kitchen stove was cold. The floorboards complained under my boots. Somewhere in the dark, water dripped into a pan I must have left behind before I rode west and swore I would not come home until I had turned into someone else. I struck a match. The little flame showed me the table, 2 chairs, the cracked blue bowl my mother had loved, and the stairway climbing into shadow. Then I heard something above me. Not a rat, not the wind, a breath. I stood still until the match burned my fingers. The sound came again, so faint I might have missed it beneath the rain. A shiver, a scrape of cloth. Someone was upstairs in my house. I took the lantern down from its hook, lit it, and lifted my rifle. Every step groaned beneath me as I climbed. At the top landing, the door to my old room stood open by the width of a hand. Cold air leaked through it. I nudged it wider with the barrel. She was in the corner beside my bed. At first, all I saw was black hair plastered to a pale brown face, a soaked dress clinging heavy to her shoulders, and eyes wide enough to catch the lantern light. She had backed herself between the wall and the bed frame, one hand pressed against the floor, the other closed tight around something at her throat. She was shaking so hard the bed rope beside her trembled. "Please," she whispered. I lowered the rifle at once. The room held its breath. Rain tapped at the window. A draft moved through the cracked pane and lifted the wet ends of her hair. Her lips were nearly blue. "I won't hurt you," I said. She did not believe me. I could see that plain as daylight. Her eyes moved from my face to my hands, then to the rifle, then back to the doorway as if measuring whether she could run past me. She could not. She had no strength left for... I set the rifle outside the door where she could see me do it. Then I held up both hands and took one step back. "My name is Eli Cole," I said. "This is my house." Her face tightened, as if that made things worse. "I did not take anything," she said. Her voice was rough from cold and fear. "I came only because..." She swallowed, but her teeth were chattering too hard for the words to come clean. "Because of an old custom," she said at last. "A woman may come to a man's house and ask protection. If he gives fire and food, she is under his roof." The words sounded practiced, but not believed. I had heard enough frontier stories to know men often used custom as a blanket to cover cruelty, trade, marriage, ownership, whatever they wanted to name decent. I did not know the custom she spoke of. I did not know if it had truth in it, or if fear had shaped it into something she could say. But I knew this. No woman crossed 5 miles of freezing Missouri rain in the dark for ceremony. She had come because the world behind her had become worse than the stranger ahead. "What is your name?" I asked. Her fingers tightened around the thing at her throat. "Mira." "All right, Mira." I kept my voice low. "You are near frozen. That comes first." She stared at me. I moved slowly, the way I would around a hurt colt. No quick hands, no sudden reach. I took an old quilt from the foot of the bed and slid it across the floor toward her. She looked at it for a long moment before touching it. "I will go down," I said. "I'll start the stove. There are dry clothes in the chest if the mice haven't eaten them. My sister's old things, maybe. I will leave them outside the door." Still, she said nothing. So I stepped back into the hall, picked up the rifle, and carried it downstairs with me. My hands remembered the house better than my heart did. I split kindling by the stove box, packed dry bark beneath it, and coaxed a flame up through ash and iron. Smoke coughed once into the room, then caught the draft and climbed proper. Soon the stove began its old ticking sound, metal warming inch by inch. I found beans in a jar, salt pork wrapped in cloth, and a little cornmeal that had stayed dry. Not much, but enough. I put water on and cut the pork thin. While it heated, I went to the back door and checked the yard. Nothing moved beyond the rain. Still, the mud told stories if a man cared to read it. I lifted the lantern and looked over the porch edge. One set of small footprints led from the north side of the house, stumbling, sliding, nearly falling twice. No horse tracks close. She had come on foot. I barred the back door. Then I checked the front. The latch hung loose. I cursed under my breath, fetched a nail from the shelf, and hammered the plate tight enough to hold until morning. Each strike sounded too loud in the empty house. When I turned, Mira stood at the bottom of the stairs. The quilt was wrapped around her shoulders. Her wet hair hung down her back. She had changed into one of my sister Ruth's old dresses, too short at the wrist and plain gray from many washings. She looked smaller in it, younger, though her eyes were not young at all. I stepped away from the door so she could see the bar across it. "Lock was bad," I said. "It is better now." She looked at the door, then at me. Not gratitude, not yet. Only surprise, as if she had expected questions first, payment second, kindness never. I took a bowl from the shelf and poured broth into it, thick with beans and pork fat. I set it on the table and backed away. "Eat by the stove," I said. "You need warmth more than manners." She came forward carefully. Every step looked borrowed. She held the bowl in both hands and lowered herself onto the floor near the stove, not the chair. The heat reached her face, and for the first time her eyes closed, only for a breath. Then she forced them open again. I knew that kind of tired, the kind that feared sleep because sleep left a person helpless. So I did not tell her she was safe. Words like that were cheap in a country where doors broke easy and men lied with steady voices. Instead, I took the lantern and made a slow round of the house. I checked each window. I wedged a chair beneath the kitchen latch. I brought in more firewood so I would not have to open the door again. Then I took my bedroll from my pack and spread it across the kitchen floor, far from the stove, far from her. She watched everything. When I sat, I kept my hands where she could see them. The rain hardened against the glass. Somewhere outside, a branch scraped the siding like fingernails. Mira flinched. I rose, took my coat from the peg, and went to the window. I did not pull the curtain wide, just enough to see the black yard and the silver slant of rain. "Only the walnut tree," I said. She nodded, though I was not sure she believed that. For a while, the only sounds were the stove, the weather, and the spoon touching her bowl. Then she said, "You do not ask why I came." I looked at the firebox where orange light breathed through the grate. "Not tonight." Her brow bent slightly. "Most men ask. Most men talk too much." That almost changed her face. Not a smile, something smaller, a crack in the frozen fear. She ate another spoonful, slower now. I leaned back against the wall and let the warmth settle into my bones. The farm creaked around us, old and tired, but not empty anymore. That should have troubled me. A stranger in my kitchen, trouble at my door. A past I had come home to bury and now could not even sit with alone. But as I watched Mira hold that bowl like it might be taken from her, I felt the truth of the night settle heavy and plain. She had not come to bind herself to any old custom. She had come to stay alive. And whether I wanted the burden or not, my roof had become the last dry ground she could find. Mira did not sleep so much as surrender. She sat by the stove until the bowl slipped from her hands and struck the floor with a dull, wooden sound. I caught it before it spilled, and she flinched awake so hard her shoulder hit the wall. I did not move toward her. I only set the bowl on the table and turned the damper lower. "Rest," I said. "The stove will hold." She watched me through half-closed eyes, fighting the very thing that might save her. Then exhaustion took what fear would not give. Her head bowed, and her breath turned slow. I stayed awake until dawn. The rain stopped near first light, leaving the farm glazed with ice. The walnut limbs bent low. The creek spoke louder than it had the night before, swollen and quick under its crusted banks. When gray light crept through the kitchen window, I rose quiet, put coffee on, and stepped outside with my rifle. Her tracks had softened in the mud, but they were still there, crooked and desperate. They came from the creek bottom, not the road. Whoever she feared, she had avoided open ground. I followed them to the back fence. There, near the low wash where cattle used to cross, I found 2 fresh horse prints, not hers. The riders had stopped beyond the cottonwoods and turned away before reaching the house. Maybe they had lost her in the storm. Maybe they had seen my dark windows and thought the place abandoned. Either way, they had come close enough. When I returned, Mira was standing by the stove with the quilt around her. Her eyes went to the mud on my boots, then to my face. "You saw," she said. "I saw riders near the creek." The color left her. I set the rifle against the table. "Are they kin?" She shook her head once. "Then tell me enough to help you." For a long while she said nothing. The coffee boiled over and hissed on the stoveplate. Outside, ice slid from the roof in small breaking sheets. Finally, she reached beneath Ruth's old dress and drew out what she had been holding at her throat. It was a charm, no larger than a silver dollar. Bone, I thought at first, then shell. It had been carved smooth by years of fingers, with tiny marks cut around the edge. A strip of faded red cloth held it. "My mother left this," she said. "It was hers before I was born." I did not touch it. Mira looked down at the charm as if it were a living thing. "I was with a trader's family near the Osage Road, Harlan Voss and his sons. They took me in after fever killed the woman I traveled with." Her mouth tightened. "That is what they tell people, that they took me in." I waited. "They kept my wages, said food and shelter counted against them. Said I owed more each month than I earned. Then Harlan said I would marry his eldest son by spring." The stove clicked. The house seemed to lean closer. "I refused," she said, a small word, a whole war inside it. "After that, they stopped speaking to me like I was a woman. They spoke like I was a mule gone stubborn. Harlan's wife searched my bundle and found this." Her fingers closed around the charm. "She said it would fetch a good price from a collector in town. I took it back and ran. I ran because they locked me in the smokehouse." The words landed harder than any crying would have. I saw it then, the freezing rain, the creek, the bare strength it took to cross fields in the dark. Not ritual, not romance, not some old custom neat enough for men to understand. Survival. I picked up the coffee pot and poured 2 cups. My hand shook once and I set the pot down before she could see too much of what anger did in me. "You can leave when you choose," I said, "not when they choose." She looked at me and something in her face broke open just a little. Not relief. Relief was too soft for what she carried. It was the first hard stone of trust laid in mud. By noon, the cold sharpened. I fixed the front lock proper with a new plate from the shed, then braced the back door with a split oak bar. Mira watched from the kitchen, not idle. When I handed her a sack of flour and told her to carry it beneath the loose floorboard by the pantry, she did it without question. We hid salt, beans, cartridges, and a coil of rope in 3 places. I showed her how the kitchen window looked toward the creek if she stood beside the chimney instead of in front of the glass. Never show a full shape, I told her. Let them wonder how many are inside. She nodded. I gave her my old cap and ball pistol. It looked too heavy in her hand. I have fired before, she said. At cans? At snakes. That will do. For the first time, she almost smiled. Near dusk, I saw smoke beyond the hill, a thin line, pale against the dark trees. Too steady for brush, too small for a farm chimney. Mira came to my side before I called her. She saw it and gripped the pistol tight. "They are waiting," she whispered. "Maybe." "No, Harlan does not hurry when he thinks hunger will do the work." That was the second truth of the day. They did not need to storm the house if they could watch it, freeze it, starve it, make me decide one stranger was not worth my roof. They had mistaken me for a wiser man. That night we did not light a lamp. The stove gave all the glow we allowed. Mira sat on the stair halfway up where she could see the front room and kitchen both. I kept near the back wall, rifle across my knees. Sometime after midnight, the chickens screamed. I was on my feet before thought caught up. Mira did not cry out. She moved exactly as I had shown her, down 2 steps, low beside the banister, pistol pointed at the floor until she had a reason. Outside, something thudded against the henhouse. Then came a man's voice from the dark. "Cole, we know she's in there." I knew the voice. Not well, but enough. Harlan Voss had traded coffee and nails at my father's table years before. He had laughed loud, paid slow, and looked at everything as if it could be priced. "This is family business," he called. Mira's breath caught behind me. I lifted the rifle but stayed away from the window. "No family of yours here." A pause, then another voice, younger. "She stole from us." Mira whispered, "That is Bram." The eldest son, the promised husband. I felt the old house around us, every gap in the boards, every weakness I had ignored when loneliness was the only thing trying to get in. "Leave before morning," I called, "and you ride out whole." Harlan laughed once. "You always were a strange one, Eli. Your father had sense." That struck where he meant it to. My father had kept peace with men he disliked because peace kept fences standing. I had learned that. I had also learned how much rot peace could hide. A flame sparked outside. Mira saw it when I did. They had shoved burning straw against the shed wall. I ran. Not out the door. I went through the pantry window, the one with the loose frame, dropping hard into frozen mud. Pain shot up my knee, but I stayed low and crossed behind the rain barrel. Smoke crawled under the shed roof, black and bitter. A shape moved near the henhouse. I swung the rifle stock before he turned. He went down with a grunt. The torch fell into the mud and hissed. From the house, Mira fired. The shot cracked through the dark. Not wild, not at a man. She hit the tin wash basin I had hung beside the porch, and the sudden metal scream made the horses rear near the lane. One rider cursed. Hooves scrambled. I heard Bram shout, "There's more than one!" Good girl, I thought. Then Harlan came out of the smoke with a knife. He was older than I remembered, thick through the middle, beard rimed white with cold. But his eyes were quick and mean. He lunged for the shed door, meaning to get between me and the house. I caught his wrist. We hit the wall together, hard enough to shake sparks from the roof. The knife scraped my sleeve and bit into the flesh beneath. Heat flashed down my arm. I drove my shoulder into him, but the mud betrayed my footing. We went down by the woodpile. He was strong, with the strength of a man used to forcing endings. "Should have stayed gone, Cole," he breathed. I smelled tobacco on him, smoke, greed. Then Mira stepped onto the porch. She had the pistol in both hands. Her face was white, but her arms were steady. "Harlan," she said. He froze, not because of the gun, because she had said his name like he was no longer master of it. "That charm is mine," she said. "My labor was mine. My life is mine." For 1 second, the whole farm held still. Then Bram called from the lane, panicked now. "Pa, riders on the road." That was the third turn the night gave us. Neighbors, not many. 2 lanterns bobbed beyond the walnut trees, then old Mrs. Bell's sons, likely drawn by the shot and the fire. Harlan heard them too. Men like him could do wicked work in darkness. They grew less brave by witness. He shoved away from me, breathing hard. "This is not finished," he said. I stood between him and the porch, blood running warm into my palm. "It is here." The riders gathered themselves fast. Bram dragged the fallen man up. Harlan backed toward the lane, eyes fixed on Mira with a hatred that promised memory. But he left. They all did. Their horses tore mud from the yard and vanished into the trees. Only when the sound faded did Mira lower the pistol. The shed wall still smoked. I grabbed the water bucket with my good hand, but Mira was already beside me. Together we threw water until the last red seam died in the boards. Mrs. Bell's boys arrived breathless, asking questions I had no strength to answer. They saw the blood, the burned wall, the tracks, the woman holding a pistol in Ruth's gray dress. To their credit, they asked fewer questions than they might have. By morning, the story had changed shape before reaching town. Harlan Voss had tried to burn a man's shed over a woman he claimed owed him debt. Debt sounded smaller than captivity, but it was enough. Men who would ignore cruelty sometimes understood fire near property. The sheriff came 2 days later, slow and unhappy. By then, Mrs. Bell had sat with Mira, heard enough, and sent word to 3 households. Harlan did not return. Not then, not after. A man can bully one frightened woman easier than a whole road of watchful neighbors. Spring came late. My arm healed stiff. Mira stayed through the thaw because the creek ran high. Then through planting because I could not hitch and sow alone. Then through summer because the beans came up strong and the roof needed patching before fall. We stopped pretending there was a date for leave. She learned the farm's moods, which hens hid eggs in the hay, where the cellar stayed coolest, how to hang mint near the door against flies, how to smoke venison low so it kept. I learned that she hummed when kneading bread and went quiet before storms. We traded at Bell's Crossing. We mended harness. We argued once over the south field and both proved half right. One evening, after the first frost silvered the pumpkin vines, Mira hung her mother's charm above the kitchen shelf. Not hidden, not clutched, placed. I stood in the doorway with an armload of wood and understood what she had done. "You sure?" I asked. She looked around the room, the stove, the table, the patched door, the 2 cups drying by the basin. "Yes," she said, "I am not running with it tonight." The words filled the house more warmly than fire. I had come back to that farm believing it was only a place to endure, a roof over regret, a field for one man's silence. But Mira brought breath into it, work into it, danger too, and fear, and the stubborn labor of trust. We did not make grand promises. We made supper. We fixed what broke. We watched the road when it needed watching and the sky when weather turned. By winter, folks stopped calling it the old Cole place. They called it Eli and Mira's. And for the first time in my life, the name sounded like home.